Hi everybody, welcome back. I'm the Strategy Professor, and today we're going to be doing a brand new tier list for 8.19, and this is going to be the support tier list. So as always, you can find timestamps in the description if you want to jump around to your favorite parts. And I'll also have this Google Doc linked in the description as well. And within this Google Doc that we're going to be going over, I'll have a little mini Google Doc for each one of these. You can click on it. You go in there, and it has kind of like just a real quick snapshot guide for you. It'll have a link to the abilities of the champion. It'll have a rating system that I created for you. It'll have recommended runes, recommended items, and if I have an in-depth guide for the champion, it'll have that listed at the bottom as well. As far as this rating system, it's just a real quick 1 to 5 scale that I put in just to give you an idea about the strengths and weaknesses of certain champions. So 1 would be the champion is one of the worst champions at that position for whatever that task is, and 5 would be that is one of the strongest champions at that position for whatever that task is. So lane pressure is just how likely is a champion able to get priority during the laning phase. Kill threat is how likely is a champion able to get kills during the laning phase. Safety is how safe is the champion overall, so can they survive ganks? Actually, I think that, speaking of which, Pike should definitely be 5. It's one of the safest supports out there. And how well can they position in team fights? Scaling, how well does the champion perform over time? And then reliability is how likely is it that someone can play the champion at an optimal level. So there's 2 parts to that. One part is how difficult is the champion mechanically to play, and how difficult are the decisions that you make on that champion. And then also the other end of it is how easy is it to shut that champion down, right? Either through counter picks or through just certain elements of the meta that make it unfavorable for that champion against certain compositions or in certain matchups. Okay, so just how likely is it that the champion is going to put up reliable results? Okay, so let's go ahead and get in here. And this one's going to be faster than a lot of my other ones. I have very limited time today. I need to get out, get on the road, and go teach. I'm still in the process of commuting 5 hours down from Ohio to Tennessee to teach on Tuesday, Wednesdays, and Thursdays. And I'm just trying to get this out here before I hit the road. So I'm going to experiment and do something a little bit faster this video. So let me know what you think in the description. I know some people have been asking for faster tier lists for a while. Usually they're about 45 minutes to an hour long. I'm going to see if I can get this one done in like 15 to 20 minutes. So let's go ahead and get through it. That means we can't spend too much time on each champion, but I just want to focus mostly on what's changed in this patch and what's evolved in this meta over the last 2 weeks or so. And so if you want a more in-depth look at these things, be sure to check out some of the guides or some of the playlists that I have for these champions out there. Each one of them, I'm probably going to have a playlist with numerous videos where you can just go through and watch how I talk about the champion, how I recommend playing the champion, you know, which items to get in certain situations, which runes to get. So go watch that stuff for more in-depth. Right now, I'm just going to focus mostly on what's changed recently about the champ. Okay, so Pike up a couple of slots. I had him at tier 3 in the last, or number 3 overall within the tier 1 list in the last couple of patches. This is also plat minus for those of you that are new to the channel. This is not for professional gameplay or challenger level gameplay. This is for a plat minus audience, non-specialist, non-one tricks. And I look at the potential power in addition to popularity and stats, because popularity and stats currently don't project how a champion will do necessarily in the future with any changes on a given patch. Okay, so Pike's up, and the big thing about Pike, and I can go ahead and, well, I don't need to pull up the surrender at 20. He's getting 50 extra damage this patch. At least that's what it looks like right now on his ultimate. So that means it's not only going to execute at 200, but now it's going to execute at 250. Starting at rank 6. This is a very, very big deal because that means he's going to execute particularly squishy champions 25% more, which is just massive. So he's not only going to be able to kill individual people, but that means he's going to get his resets faster and potentially kill multiple people. He's already a really good champion, so I'm not quite sure why they're buffing him. But yeah, very powerful, very safe. He has an awesome escape with his W and his E in the laning phase. It's really difficult to gank him. He has really good engage with both his Q or his E. He's very tanky. He has a unique kit that people have sort of figured out probably about over the last month or so that works very well on him, which is running Aftershock and then building him very tanky. So you go Aftershock, Bone Plating, Chrysalis, Revitalize, and then Perfect Timing and Cosmic Insight. And the reason that you go tanky on Pike is because his passive heals for an astronomical amount. And the more resistances you have, the more effective that healing becomes. So if you heal back 300 health and you have 0 armor, it's going to take 300 damage to mitigate that 300 health, right? But if you have 100 armor, then it's going to take 600 physical damage to mitigate that 300 healing. So on champions that have a ton of healing like that, then they usually perform best when more resistances come in, when you're dealing with champions that have more armor and champions that have more magic resist. So historically, this has been something we've examined on the channel in terms of enchanters, right? So like, how effective is a Janus shield really? And it turns out that it's way more effective against tanks than it is squishy targets. So the same kind of applies to Pike, where tankiness is going to be often much more effective than damage on him in a lot of respects, because it's going to allow him to stick around in a fight longer so he can get those executes, because that's mostly where his sort of damage and effectiveness comes in fights, is he just CCs people with his E and his Q, and then he gets those resets. So the longer you can stay alive in a fight and just sort of disrupt and let the enemy team get low, then get those resets, that's how he's going to be most effective. Whereas if you try to build him with a bunch of lethality and go for you know, big hits and big kills, that's not as effective, because the lethality doesn't affect the execute, because it doesn't actually do damage if you're doing it properly. It just straight up does, it just executes him. It just gets rid of him. So it's basically true damage in a sense, and that means that lethality doesn't affect it at all. And the rest of his kit doesn't do that much damage, right? Like, his hook is not going to do a ton of damage, and it doesn't scale particularly well with AD. It's okay. Same thing with his E. His W doesn't do any damage. His passive doesn't do any damage. So I know people originally were messing with like Dustblade and Ghostblade and things like that on him, and it's okay. But really just getting things like Frozen Heart, Spirit Visage, you know, you could even get something like Knight's Vow, or, you know, something like that later on if you want to, is effective. Now, Frozen Heart in particular is really effective on him, because remember that HP converts over to AD on him, so it doesn't actually make you any tankier. So Frozen Heart's good because it just gives you a huge stack of raw health. It gives you the 20% CDR, which is fantastic on him, particularly because he has to get mobility boots, which means that he can't get Ionian boots, and he's going to be down in CDR a little bit. And he is so reliant on his cooldowns, and his cooldowns are pretty long, right? His E, his Q, and his R are all, like, decently long cooldowns, and so he benefits very heavily from CDR. And then he's going to be in close after he uses his E to engage, and so that's going to lower the attack speed of close-range champions that rely heavily on attack speed, like a Master Yi, a Vayne, a Kaisa. All of these champions, that 15% slow can be a pretty big deal. So, so that gives him a really unique build and a really unique playstyle that in some ways is kind of toxic. I think that Riot should probably change something about his passive to where it doesn't heal for as much, but that's just how it is. Revitalize, you take that, and that gives that even more healing, because that counts as a self-heal whenever you heal yourself with your passive. And so if you're below 40% health, you get 15% extra healing, which is super strong. So yeah, he's good. You can also go things like, if you get perfect timing, that'll help you stall out, so maybe you can get that final reset, or maybe your escape comes up again and you can get away. Then you can eventually turn that into either something like a Guardian Angel, or blanking out on the 2,500 gold item that Cho'Gath gets, that gives you both armor and magic resist. But yeah, you can get that as well. So there are lots of different build paths you can go with perfect timing. So yeah, I mean, overall, I think he's really good. So he can start fights. He has really heavy contributions to damage later on through these executes. Has a ton of CC, has a lot of sustain in lane. He's not going to get poked out by Nami or Zyra, so he's just fantastic. Some of the only shortcomings of him is his poke is, or his peel rather, is not as reliable as something like Thresh. So if you have an assassin diving your AD carry that's really fed, there's not as much you can do about that. You can get things like Knight's Vow, you can get things like Locket, if you want to, but he's really more of a primarily offensive focused support. So he also generates a lot of extra gold off of his ult. So you're going to be getting a lot of gold, so you can actually afford bigger ticket support items, support tank items like Spirit Visage, like Frozen Heart. You can go a little bit up in budget beyond the standard kind of Locket Knight's Vow, the 2200, 2300 gold range. You can start getting into the 2700, 2800 gold range items if you need to, because you get that extra gold off of those kills. So yeah, Pike, fantastic. I think he's going to be banned a lot on this patch. That 50 extra damage is going to be a very big deal. Really strong. Okay, someone else that's getting buffed on this patch. Looks like we're definitely going over 15 minutes because I just spent like 5 minutes talking about Pike. But we'll talk about the first 5 quite a bit, and then we'll move a little bit faster through the rest of them. So Thresh is getting an extra 4 seconds off of... Yeah, I believe it's 4 seconds off of his initial hook cooldown. As soon as you max hook, it's the same thing at the end, but that extra timing early on is going to let you fish for hooks more, which is really powerful, and it's going to be 20 less mana, so it's going to go from 80 mana down to 60, which is fantastic. That means you can afford to throw more hooks, and you're not going to be as punished if you miss in the laning phase, which is great. I mean, ideally with Thresh, you know, you would want to land Flay first and then hook, but sometimes going up for that Flay, you can eat a whole lot of harass trying to do that. And if they end up dodging your Flay, or if your AD carry doesn't follow up, or you just can't quite get the angle for your hook, you can end up taking like half your health in damage by trying to do something like that. And it's just flat out really dangerous to do it against champions like Zyra, who can just blow you up. And so being able to throw that hook from a distance, if you can get bush control especially, is going to be very handy. And I think Thresh is really strong right now. We'll see if we can look him up here. Now, I had been looking at the Wikia, but it's been kind of janky on my account for a while. But this one's a pretty good site too. LOL Gamepedia. It gives you all the stats for champions. So there's been a new build for Thresh. He was buffed fairly recently, where his Dark Passage got lowered when you max it out by 4 seconds, which is a really, really big deal. And so people now are maxing Hook, and then they're maxing Dark Passage second. And this is a really interesting development and playstyle, I think, that's helped Thresh out a lot. And the big thing is, like, this is a nice shield. I mean, it ends up being on a 12-second cooldown, which is just a little bit more than a Janna shield. So once you get to the 40 or 45% CDR, it ends up being like 6.5-second cooldown, and it gives you a 220 base shield with 100% of your souls. And by the time you end up maxing the second around level 13, you're going to have at least 100 souls a lot of the time, 80 to 100. In kind of the, 30-minute mark. And even before then, it's very, very handy. So it's like a 320 shield, and that shields you and one other person, and effectively that gives them a flash for free. Like, the lantern is very, very useful. So even if you're not using it for that really big engage or that really big save, even just letting someone reposition from an Olaf that's charging at them, your AD carry, for example, or someone's diving the back line, and you want to pull your AD carry up to the front line where tanks can help peel them. There's just so many different uses for Dark Passage, and it's got a nice big shield, a low cooldown. So I think that's opened up a lot of potential opportunities for Thresh. A lot of Threshes have also been getting things like Redemption, which increases the healing on that as well, just Redemption and Locket builds. So that's pretty good. And then you can go Revitalize as well if you want, and that gives you even more shielding power. So he's got really good CC, obviously, with his Flay. It can displace people. It can knock people out of the air, which is awesome, which means it can stop like a Zac engage or a like a Leona in particular. Leona trying to go in with her E. Jack's trying to jump in, Jarvan trying to jump in. So there are a lot of champions where if you practice Thresh and time that correctly, you can peel really, really effectively. And then, of course, his hook ends up going down to a pretty low cooldown, so it ends up being like 6.5 seconds as well at max rank. And I'm going to close my door so I'm not as loud. At max rank, and you get 3 seconds off whenever you land it on somebody. So it can really go down to like a 3-second cooldown on a hook, which is really, really nice. So it does have a slight delay on it and a pretty thin hitbox. You have to practice it a lot. It's fairly tricky to use if you're new to Thresh, but he's just great. I mean, he has really good CC. He's like Pike. He's like a more defensive Pike, is how you want to think of it. So he doesn't do as much damage, but he has more CC, and he has a much better ability to peel. His ult is still on kind of a long cooldown. I really wish it wasn't 140 at the start. I wish it went to like 120, 180 or something like that. 100 and then 80, and then they lower the damage or something on it. I just feel like you have to be really close for this to be effective. So, I mean, it's okay. Like, it's really good. Obviously, if you land your hook and then go in and then drop the box, then it can be pretty good. And it has pretty high base damage, so it's all right. It's a pretty effective tool. So he does have a shield. He's pretty good against assassins because he can build sort of armor himself. He scales up with the souls. He can shield himself and an ally. He can flay. He can death sentence. He's just the most flexible support in the game. He's a beautiful blend of offense and defense. He's always been good, but something that has kind of brought him back into the spotlight has been this buff to Dark Passage. Also, the enchanters getting nerfed help him a ton because now he doesn't get outscaled in terms of raw stats. Because before 8-12, if an enchanter just stacked, Redemption, Ardent Censor, and Mikhail's, then they would just heal through anytime you engage. Janna would just blow you away and just heal through anything that you're doing. So the game, as far as supports are concerned, has moved away from plus healing and shielding as a stat, which has been really overpowered for a long time, towards more engage-oriented champs. So there are still some champs that abuse plus healing and shielding, like Nami, but I think this has opened up a space for these engaged champs. Another thing recently that's changed that has helped out Thresh, as well as champions like Recon and Pike, have been the nerfs to Tahm Kench and the nerfs to Morgana. Now, Tahm is primarily only picked at really high elos. A lot of the time he has a very low win rate, like 46, 47%. At lower ranks, and they've nerfed him a lot, though. So those are two anti-engage champions that are really good against Thresh and Pike, and those have been nerfed out of the meta. So a lot of the plus healing and shielding has been nerfed. A lot of the anti-engage champs, like Morgana, like Tahm Kench, have been nerfed and have fallen out of the meta a little bit. And there have been some specific buffs to Pike and to Thresh, both on this patch and in previous patches. So I think that positions them very, very well, and they'll help you climb a lot if you get really good with them. Okay, Nami is another one. Nami statistically is probably the strongest support right now. She's very easy to play. Well, she's not like as easy as something like a Sona to play, but she's still going to be very, very effective. Right, so she's a great autofill champ. If you, land your W, you just walk up, point click. You can do it through minions. It not only does damage to the enemy, but it also heals you. And she scales really well with plus healing and shielding and AP. So you have lots of versatile builds. She can really exploit Athene's Unholy Grail. Very strong with that. She does have nice and counter engage with her wave and her bubble, which is pretty useful against things like Thresh, Recon, Pike to an extent. It's not as it doesn't shut them down as hard as things like Morgana or Tahm Kench or like the old Janna, but it does a pretty serviceable job. So anything that's not like a hardcore engage lane, she's going to be able to do a lot of damage and poke people out. She's really oppressive early on, particularly things like Jen or Misfortune that can also apply pressure. So she's still going to be very good. Great laning phase. She's just squishy. She's vulnerable to assassins, but overall still going to be a very strong champ. Not much has changed about Nami recently. If you want to play an enchanter, I think she's probably the best one in the list. Okay, Zyra is another champion that I've moved up a little bit here. Kind of a newcomer to tier 1, at least on this patch. But she's perennially a tier 1 champ at gold and lower. I think that a couple of the things that have changed about her to improve her standing a little bit have been the buff that's coming to Leandries on the next patch. They are taking off 5 AP, but they're also adding on an additional 1.5% burn. So if you burn somebody and it's not empowered, I think it's going to burn for 4.5%. And if it is empowered, then it's going to burn for 7.5%. So that's a lot of extra damage, particularly if tanks start coming into the meta. And this Electrocute build is actually really powerful in her too, because she can proc it pretty reliably with her plants and an auto attack in the laning phase. And then that also gives her Taste of Blood and Ravenous Hunter, which are two different ways that she can sustain herself in the lane. And she can still take a lot of the poke with Absolute Focus and Scorch from the Sorcery Tree. So I think she's very strong right now. I think a good build path is just to go Sorcerers into Oblivion Orb into Haunting Guys and then finish up Leandries there. Unless you're just super, super fed, and then you can just buy Leandries flat out. And usually I decide that if I've got a couple of kills, I'll get Haunting Guys first, and if I can afford a Blasting Wand on one of my backs, then I'll just go ahead and pick up the Blasting Wand and finish Leandries. But if I can't afford that Blasting Wand, if the game looks like it's going slower, then I'll probably just go ahead and grab the Oblivion Orb first. So she has tremendous lane pressure, tremendous poke. It's very hard to fight back against her. Her Q goes through minions, her E goes through minions, so both her all-in and her poke can completely ignore minions for the most part. She has pretty much infinite mana because she has 15 mana per 5 during the laning phase, so she doesn't have to buy Fairy Charms. She has really high base damages with her plants. She can harass very well under tower with her plants. She scales pretty well because she has that high base damage, and the plants translates really well once you start getting Spell Pen as the game progresses. So, and, you know, like a lot of the other champions I mentioned, the nerf to plus healing and shielding on patch 8.12 means that a lot of these enchanters are not going to outright outscale her as much as they used to as the game goes on. She's particularly good against things like Thresh because she's very good anti-engage, and she can poke him down and he doesn't have a heal. Now, something like Pike might be able to sustain through the laning phase, but she can still poke out the AD carry quite a bit. So she is vulnerable to ganks, and she's vulnerable to assassins. So you have to be very careful with your positioning. But if you're left alone in the bot lane and you're playing Zyra correctly, you should pretty much never lose. She's extremely oppressive. So really, really strong, particularly with things like Jin and Misfortune, Draven, other bully type of champs in the early game. Okay. Recon's the final one that I want to mention on here. I do still think that Recon is really good, but I think that his like real lack of a laning phase can be exploited pretty heavily by things like Nami and Zyra. He's very good once he gets to level 6, but and particularly Leona has become very popular lately, and she's extremely good into Recon. Morgana's still good into Recon. Recon has the best engage in the game, I think, the most reliable engage in the game, and he has a really, really good level 6, and he can use Unsealed Spellbook, which means that, you know, if he ever starts a fight, you know, he's probably going to win because he's going to have more summoners a lot of the time, because he's going to be able to start fights, you know, every minute or so after CDR, and once you run the enemy out of their heal and their flash and all that stuff, you're going to have, you know, you're going to have a heal, an exhaust, a barrier, a cleanse. Like, you're going to have all kinds of things that'll give you tactical edges. So I think that Recon can still be really good. He can go Zeke's, which is very good with on-hit champs. He can still go Ardent if you want to. He can go Locket, Redemption. So there are a lot of different things you can get on Recon. So you are kind of handing over the laning phase a little bit by playing Recon, but his engage is more reliable than Pike or Thresh, I think. Although, you know, his laning phase, he's not going to be able to apply as much pressure. But I still think that he is really strong. I'd be very careful blind picking him into many comms. If you do blind pick him, or you pick him before they pick their support, and they pick something like, you know, like a Leona, then don't be afraid to take Cleanse with Unsealed Spellbook. You can always grab Ignite when you need to with Unsealed Spellbook, but it's really that crowd control that will end up doing him in. So that is something that pros get sometimes, and I think it's appropriate in certain situations. Not every situation, but sometimes Cleanse can be a decent thing to take on Recon. Okay, going down to Tier 2, Lulu I still think is really strong. I did have her at Tier 1 last time. I have performed pretty well with her in the last couple of weeks, I think. The thing is, like, these on-hit champs and, like, the attack speed champs, they're popular, but they're not, like, quite as popular as I thought they would be. A lot of the strongest champs are going to be the really heavy hitters early on. So Lulu is really best with champions like Kai'Sa or Jinx or Twitch. But these aren't really that popular right now compared to other ones. It feels like every game is Misfortune, Jhin, or Lucian, pretty much. And that's what it is. I mean, 23% representation for Jhin, 26% Lucian, 11.6% Misfortune. So she is still good, but I would wait to make sure that you have a champ that is going to have a lot of scaling with attack speed. She's also particularly weak against Nami, who's very popular right now, just because Nami has a heal, and she can bully you out in the laning phase. She's okay against like Pike and Thresh. Once you get to 6, you can kind of work around them a little bit, but you know, she's a good pick overall if you have something like a Kai'Sa, a Jinx, or a Twitch on your team, and they have an assassin where Polymorph's going to be really useful. Or if they have a really close range AD carry, like if they have a Kai'Sa or they have a Vayne or something, then she's going to be really effective. So she's good in the right circumstances, but those circumstances don't show up as much as I had thought they would when I had her in Tier 1 last patch. So I still think she's good, but I think the meta is kind of shifting just slightly away from her. Athene's Unholy Grail is really good on her. Okay, Morgana's another one who is still going to be pretty popular. She did get her mana regen nerfed a little bit a couple of patches ago. They nerfed something about, I think it was the mana cost on her E. But she's still good. I mean, she's pretty decent into Pike, into Thresh. She can stop their engage. It's worth noting that her Black Shield doesn't do anything to prevent Pike's execute if they get low, so it's not going to help against that, but she's good. If you land your binds a lot, you know, she can be strong. I just feel like she's not as proactive in the laning phase as some other champions. I feel like she can get bullied out. But if you have an assassin on your team and the enemy team has a lot of crowd control, and maybe they lack a lot of raw power, especially like AD damage power, if they have a lot of you know, ability power on their team, and they just rely heavily on that CC, they have a bunch of tanks or something, the Black Shield can be really strong if they don't break it. And you can put your you put it on someone who scales super heavy, like a Kindred or a Katarina or something like that. It can be very good. Is that right, Rory? Are you feeling better now? Let's see. Were you sad this morning, Rory?
Well, I thought since she didn't take a nap yesterday, that's why I put her to bed early. Thought that she would sleep longer.
Were you a sad baby?
But no, not really.
Oh my gosh, she's getting squirrely.
She wants some of that sandwich, I think.
She's getting squirrely.
Is that right?
Oh no!
Oh no! You went down?
Why is she so mad?
Don't know. Oh, her teeth might hurt.
Yeah, she was getting some molars coming in.
Yeah. She also saw that sandwich over there.
Did you see the sandwich, Rory?
I think that's why she wanted down. Oh yeah, she's already almost over there.
Did you see it, Rory?
You. That's why she was trying to get down from you. She was like, sandwich!
Rory, that's my sandwich. Here, oh, well, you might need to go feed her then. She's gonna be angry. Yeah, Morg's pretty good. Here, come here, Rory. I'll give you a piece. Rory. Rory, look. Yeah, there you go. So yeah, pretty good. Alistar, also going to be pretty good. You know, he can engage, he can start fights, he's tanky. I just feel like things like Pike and like Thresh are going to be better. They're just going to have a bit more utility, and they, like, the bad situations are less bad for them. So if your team doesn't follow up, you know, if you hook someone as Pike or Thresh and your team doesn't follow, you have ways to get out if you're Thresh. You want more. You just want to eat all of Daddy's dinner, aren't you?
Yeah. That works.
But yeah, I mean, he's okay. The issue is, once again, that he has to go out of position to try to start fights, and Pike and Thresh don't have to do that as much if they don't want to. So I like the ranged engage better. Now, his engage is a little bit more guaranteed.
Are there crackers in that box?
In the sense that it's not necessarily a skill shot you can miss. No, there aren't any.
Oh.
And that it's a skill shot. There's another box downstairs, though. It's not one that you can miss. You can, like, not execute the combo correctly, but it's not a skill shot that you have to aim. So, that makes him good for pro play, because people dodge hooks and stuff all the time in pro play, whereas you can't really dodge Alistar running at you. But, you know, for solo queue where people, you know, really don't
Maybe we need to get ready.
don't follow up as much as they should on your engages, then I just think that he's a little bit too risky, and I'd prefer either Recon or Thresh. Oh no, she's going to get jelly on her hands now. You have to wash her hands. She's got the jelly on her hands.
I'm gonna freak out if I take her away now.
Oh god, she's getting everywhere. Yeah, get a little... You getting jelly on my legs now?
Give it to her over here.
But yeah, it's okay. And then Leona is kind of the same thing. She can be very strong, but if your team falls behind or if they don't follow up on your engages, it can be really tough. Are you luring her away with food?
Here. Let's try to get over here.
But yeah, same thing as Alistar. She can be very strong, but if people don't follow up, it's bad. Here, just get. Since I want more sandwich. God. She will be fed. We're just taking her down to the kitchen and giving her something probably more appropriate for breakfast. Is that right, Rory? We just ruined her whole world. But anyways, let's move on to the final one here. Janna, still going to be strong in the right circumstances. You know, if you have a superior late game team and you just need to peel really well and you just want to scale and sort of set up for late, then Janna can be good. It's just, she has so many bad matchups right now. Like, Nami busts her up in lane, Zyra busts her up, and then like Pike and Thresh, if they ever land a hook, it's going to be really bad news. So, you know, if you have a later game scaling champ like Kaisa or Vayne or something like that, and you're just playing for late and you're okay with losing the lane because the rest of your team just has really nice scaling, then Janna can be an okay option. But I think she's fallen quite a bit from grace and where she used to. She probably doesn't have a terrible win rate overall. I'd say she's probably still like 50, 51% win rate. So it's not like you can't win with her. She's still going to be pretty successful. Yeah, about 50%. But that's certainly far away from the 54 to 55% that she was last year. Okay, final couple of picks here. We have Sona, still going to be strong. She really reliable. You can just point, click, hit them with Qs, hit them with the W. One of the big drawbacks of Sona is that Nami is just better than she is most of the time at what she does, because Nami does that all... She has the same trading pattern with one spell. So her W does damage and heals, and so that's much more cost-effective and cooldown effective for Nami. So when Nami goes into trade, she still has her bubble, she still has her E. When Sona goes into trade, you know, she'll need to use her Q, and then if she wants to heal, she has to use her W also. Then she has no cooldowns left. And she uses a lot of mana to do that. So Sona does scale really well if you have a bunch of melee champions, a bunch of like tanks, and you're just going to ball up and team fight later on because those auras are so powerful. But Nami's going to be a lot better in the laning phase, and she's going to be a lot better for kind of a skirmishing sort of mid-game where people are just running around Clown Fiesta style. Nami's going to be better at that. Next we have Fiddlesticks. Fiddlestick's still pretty good. You know, he can still pressure waves, just push and poke, push and poke. I do like him in theory against close range AD carries like Vayne or like Kaisa, but the couple of times I've tried him this week against those type of champs, they'll just take cleanse. And if they cleanse your fear or if they get a Quicksilver Sash to get out of your fear, then it just feels really bad. It feels like you don't have anything else in your kit that you can do a lot of times. So he is very strong if the enemy AD carry doesn't like get that type of stuff. But so he's okay. I would probably rather play Zyra right now. I think you have a much better chance of getting a kill pre-6 and poking people out in a much more significant way. Like the Fiddlesticks E does still poke people a lot, but now people like can take fleet footwork and like a Doran shield and probably just heal through it a lot of the time, especially some of these Vamp Scepter users like Lucian or Vayne. Okay, Braum can still be really strong. He is very good with Lucian. Lucian is popular right now. You know, the double shots from Lucian can trigger Braum a lot more effectively. But he has a really hard time starting fights. He can do it with his ult, but he's just much better oriented for like a 0 gold economy and pro play, where you don't have to be the primary engage, and you can just guarantee that team fights are going to be successful because you're going to be chaining together that passive and hitting a lot of people with it. And team fights, and just like shielding a bunch of other projectiles. So I think he's really good in pro play. I think he'll still be tier 1 in pro play, but in solo queue, I think tier 3 is about right. If you're going Diamond Plus, he starts moving up a lot more, but for a lot of other people, I just think that he's just a little too team reliant, doesn't scale as much. So he's okay. I just feel like there are probably better choices. Soraka is still going to be strong in the right circumstance. If your team has like 3 tanks and they can really peel hard for you, then Soraka can be very effective. But if they have assassins or they have hard engage, it can be a problem. So particularly against champions like Recon, Pike, or Thresh, Soraka can have a tough time in lane. But she does have a very good matchup against Nami, because you can out-sustain her and out-poke her in lane if you don't get ganked. So there are circumstances where Soraka can be strong, but most of the time, I'd probably just rather take Nami. And then finally, we have Brand. Zyra is just way better than Brand. Brand does use Leandries, which is getting a buff, and that's nice. He's very good if the enemy team has a ton of melee champions, so that you can get more of those bounces, but I think that Zyra overall is just going to be stronger. A couple of honorable mentions here, and we'll go ahead and finish this up. So Tom Kinch, he can still be good in the right circumstances. You know, he has been nerfed a lot. They are nerfing him again this patch. They're taking off 70 base HP, which is pretty massive. But, you know, especially if you're duoed with a jungler or a mid laner or, you know, AD carry, just somebody that can use that ult effectively with him, then he could still be really good. It's just he's going to get busted up and beat up in the laning phase by everybody. Like, yeah, he can stop engages, so he's still going to be good against things like Thresh, but he's just going to get blown out of the water by things like Zyra, Lulu, even Pike. Like, there are just so many instances where he can get outscaled and beaten up. So he is good, but I think that his stats have been is crushed so much that it's really hard to justify playing him these days. But, you know, once again, if it's Diamond Plus, he starts to get better. Blitzcrank can still be really good. You land those hooks, you can get a lot of kills. I just feel like Pike and Thresh have more utility to them. They're not going to have as much outright burst damage as Blitzcrank does, so it's not as likely you're going to get a kill off of a hook with them, off your first hook. But, you know, he pays for that by not having, you know, much CC, not having very good escapes, all that kind of stuff. Bard is another one people ask about all the time. He's okay. Like, he's got a cool kit. The numbers just aren't there. They did buff his ult, so he can use that more often, which is great. But his itemization and runes are just... There isn't really an optimal, like, setup for him right now. And his attack range is just too short. A 500 attack range on a champion that really needs to auto-attack in the laning phase to be effective. It's just really rough when you're playing against things like Nami, like Zyra. And his peel is very limited. You know, if Thresh or Pike hooks your AD carry, then there's not a lot you can do about that unless you get like a miracle Q against a wall or something. It's just, it's very conditional. Karma's another one people ask for sometimes. Karma can still push in. She can still poke fairly well, but she doesn't have very reliable CC, and Nami's just better than her, and Lulu is better than her in pretty much every situation I can think of. So I'd just rather play Nami or Lulu. And the last one I'll talk about here is just Taric really quickly. I haven't tried Taric again recently, but I played against him a couple of times. He just feels very lackluster. You know, his E lost 50 damage on it a while ago. His ultimate was, like, increased. The time on it was increased by, like, 30 seconds or something because he was getting abused in the mid lane for funnel comps. And they just never gave him any compensatory buffs. So it's really rough to play Taric right now. So, I mean, like, he can work if you have a really coordinated, like, hard engaged team, but if you're just reactive, like, trying to press your ult for team fights, there's a lot of mobility out there, a lot of people that can disengage and peel, and just a lot of people that can outscale him. You know, so if you press your ult, something like Vayne or Lucian or Kai'Sa, they're probably just going to be able to run away and just reposition, you know, if that ult's going on. Or something like if Thresh hooks somebody and you press your ult, he can just, like, disengage and just not fight a lot of the time. So he is okay sometimes, but there's just so much mobility that it's hard to make his ultimate work unless you can count on your team to have a lot of CC and lock people down so they can't escape whenever you ult. And then he's just going to get outscaled by things like Lulu as the game goes on. So that's going to be it for the sports tier list. Hope you enjoyed it. It is a bit of a faster one, as I said before, but yeah, hope you like it, and I'll see you next time. Have a great day. Oh, don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoy the content.